Hey friends and fellow artists, and welcome back to another drawing class on the Draw Awesome YouTube channel. So this one is of a Kingfisher using pastel pencils. I did this quite a while ago for Art Tutor. It was a really popular class, so I thought that because Art Tutor's closing down, let's get it on YouTube and you can have a go at this one for free. It is quite a lengthy class. It's an hour and 15 minutes, just to warn you, but it is designed to take you from a blank piece of paper from scratch all the way through to a nicely finished piece of work. And I do spend a good 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning just waffling on about some useful tips to choose your paper, the best type of paper for pastel pencils, and also how you go about selecting colours. And you can apply those tips to other drawings that you do as well. It's not just specific to this one. If you've never had a go with pastel pencils before, then definitely consider getting yourself a set and giving them a try. I think they are one of the most overlooked and underrated mediums available. Everybody reaches for coloured pencils, or they want to do watercolours or oils or acrylics or even pastels, but pastel pencils are really quite forgiving. So for newcomers to art and newcomers to kind of coloured mediums, they are a really good choice to begin with. They'll allow you to layer light over dark and dark over light, unlike for example watercolours, and they're a lot less messy than soft pastels and less expensive as well. They are a little bit pricier than say your sets of graphite pencils or your ink pens and even a little set of watercolours. They are a bit pricier, and I think that anyone that gives them a try, sticks with them for a couple of drawings or so, will fall in love with them as I have. Okay, so I'm going to let you get on with this class. If you are interested in my premium drawing program, it's called Draw Awesome. You can go and find that over at www.drawawesome.com. As ever, you'll find the materials list and a download link for the reference photograph and my final drawing beneath this video. And let me know how you get on in the comments if you're going to give this one a go. I hope you do. All right, enjoy. Alright then, welcome back to the next pastel pencils lesson in this series of animal studies. Today we're going to be drawing and painting this fantastic image of a kingfisher. Really beautiful photograph this, that's going to be full of interesting challenges. And the reason the kingfisher is, well, so attention grabbing and so visually appealing, I think has a lot to do with the complementary colours of the blue and the orange. Remember that complementary pairs, those colour pairs of red and green, yellow and violet, blue and orange, when they're placed next to each other, they can really make each other sing, especially when you've got a little bit of white in between like we have got here. So why have I chosen this photograph in particular, and what are the challenges that we need to take on? Well, when I was searching for kingfisher reference photographs, the vast majority were of a static pose, that traditional pose of a bird perched on a branch, as you would expect. And I think something like that would still make a great painting in any medium, whether it's pastels or any other medium. And the texture of the branch is something that is quite nice to have a go at. It's quite easy, but quite effective to accomplish. But I wanted something with a little bit of movement in. And this is almost a signature pose for the kingfisher. It's diving into the water, out of the water, throwing up all these water droplets. It's a little bit different from that stereotypical static bird sat on a branch. And I think if we really simplify the water and maybe remove some of the busyness that's going on around here, and then if we keep the background a flat, solid colour, that for me is really going to showcase the bird. With these colours here, these really vibrant colours, it doesn't need anything in the background to distract the viewer's eye. Now, if it was a different species of bird, maybe more muted colours, then maybe we'd want to add some interest into the background, some soft defocused shapes and elements to add that extra interest, but definitely not for this bird. Now, because I've decided that I want to keep the background flat and a solid colour, and because I want to add these water droplets, that really dictates the colour of the surface that I'm going to work on, or at least the tone of the surface. If I just go for a white piece of paper, which is what so many artists just reach for without a second thought, it's going to be really difficult to render these water droplets. You know, they are very easy to create, as you'll see later on in the lesson, but you do have to have some darker colour beneath them so that these little white highlights have got something that they can stand out against. And then a pure white background also means that this brilliant white on the bird here and some of these really vibrant markings in the bird's head at the top there, they're not going to have as much punch. Remember that how light or how dark an area appears in any drawing or painting all depends on what is surrounding it. So a light mark that is surrounded by darker areas appears much lighter to our eyes, and vice versa. A dark mark that you place down that has got lighter marks around it appears darker. So the obvious choice for me, as is so often the case, is a mid-tone paper, and a grey is my preference, but you could work with maybe a mid-brown as well. I would avoid a mid-blue or a mid-green because again those colours are going to detract and maybe slightly clash with the vibrant colours that are already present within the bird. You could try this on a darker tone, so maybe a very dark grey or even a black or a dark brown, but the beak here in particular, and maybe the eye as well, they're not going to stand out as well on those darker backgrounds. Now, the other obvious challenge that we've got in this image is the wings and how blurry and defocused they are. And that's obviously because of the rapid movement. So we've got this sharp, crisp outline and detail in the head and the body area, and then these really defocused, these soft markings within the wings. Now, when I come across a reference photograph that I like, or in this case, when I'm actively searching for something, I don't usually have a medium in mind. So I tend to look for reference material, save it, and then I'll think about the medium later on. When I saw this image, right away, I thought pastel pencils, because no other medium is as versatile when it comes to creating both your sharp and crisp detailed lines and also the soft defocused markings that you're going to need for an area like this. I do think a Kingfisher in colour pencils would look fantastic as well, but it's going to be much more difficult to accomplish this area here, much more time consuming using that medium as opposed to a softer medium like pastels. I don't paint with oils or acrylics. If I did, I'd definitely try and go for oils because it's easier to blend and get softer markings on the canvas than it is compared to acrylics. So that's my thought process in a nutshell. I find a reference image that I like, and then I think about how I can improve the composition compared to that reference photograph, and that usually does mean how I can simplify it. And then I think about the lines and the marks that I'm going to have to make and whether or not those lines and marks suit one medium over another. And then I'll think about the amount of time that I've got available, and that'll dictate very often the style that I go for. So if I've got a little bit more time, I'll go for something a bit more detailed, maybe something a bit larger. If I've got less time, it'll be more sketchy, more impressionistic, maybe a little bit smaller. And I find that that's much easier. There's much less chance of you creating a piece of artwork that doesn't work if you allow the subject matter to dictate the medium. If you try to force a very specific image to fit a very specific medium, then it can definitely be more challenging. It helps if you work in more than one medium, obviously, and it certainly makes art more fun as well, I think. But having said all that, if you just get yourself used to pastel pencils and you really give them a good try, there are very few subjects that you won't be able to take on because of their versatility. So what about the surface then that we're going to be working on today? There are lots of different pastel papers on the market, lots of different categories, and it can get a little bit confusing. I've done a separate video on our YouTube channel that discusses the paper surfaces for pastels in a little bit more detail, but to save you time watching that, I'm going to quickly take you through two types of paper now that I recommend the vast majority of the time. One is a bit more affordable, it's great for practicing, and it'll work for more polished pieces of work as well. And then the second is definitely a more expensive, more luxurious option, but it's one that I think you should definitely consider. So the first paper is called Canson Mi Teintes, and this surface texture is quite subtle. It's got a kind of a dimpled feel to it. It looks a little bit like a honeycomb pattern, and this is the paper that I recommend for most people most of the time. It's got enough tooth and texture to allow you to layer colours on top of one another, and it's really affordable. So a sheet this size will cost you something around about 40 pence, maybe 40 US cents. You can get it as a pad like this, and this is the grey tones pad, or you can get it as loose sheets, which I've got laid down here. Check Amazon or any of the big online art stores, they all will supply and stock Canson Mi Teintes either in those pads or the loose sheets. Now, an alternative to Canson Mi Teintes is an Ingres paper. So Ingres is a type of paper rather than a brand. So you'll get lots of brands that make their version of Ingres paper. And it tends to be the lowest price, most affordable pastel paper that you can get. The only reason that I prefer the Canson is that I just prefer the honeycomb texture rather than the gridded sort of crisscross pattern that you'll get with a Ingres paper. Now, the second paper that I recommend is my absolute favorite pastel paper. It's a lot more expensive. A sheet, this size here is going to cost you £2, £2.50, $3, $3.50. So it's 5 or 6 times more expensive, the price of Canson Mi Teintes. Definitely not one that you should be using for practicing. So my favourite paper is Pastelmat. This is by Clairefontaine. And it feels very much like a fine sandpaper, very, very fine sandpaper. This is one of the lighter colours. We'll be going for one of the more mid-tone greys. So a colour like this would be ideal. If you're relatively new to pastel pencils, then follow this lesson and any of the other lessons that you're following for the first time on your Canson or your Ingres paper. If you're more experienced, or if you do this lesson maybe for practice first and then you come back and have another go for a more refined piece, then maybe treat yourself to some Pastelmat paper. You definitely won't be disappointed. I'm going to be doing it on Canson today. I would love to do it on the Pastelmat, but I think, to be fair, we'll do it on the Canson because that's what's most available to most people. The thing that I want to stress is that the techniques don't change at all. The advantage that I've got with the Pastelmat, or that you'll have if you use it, is that the lights will be a little bit brighter, particularly when you put them on over the dark layers. So the whites, you know, if you put a white highlight on top of a dark brown or a dark blue or even a black, it'll still show up as a nice crisp white. If we do that on the Canson paper, it's going to be a little bit more defocused, not going to be quite as crisp. But the overall result, it's not going to make too much difference. So the pencils that I'm going to be using today are by Faber Castell. They're Pitt pastel pencils. These are my particular favourites, but any pastel pencils will do. Derwent do a really good brand as well. There's other brands out there. Any pastel pencils that fit your budget or that you've got already. In terms of the set size, this is a set of 36, but I won't be using anything like this for this particular study. I'll be picking 10, maximum 12 pencils in just a moment and taking you through that process and how we do that. I have yet to find a subject matter that I can't recreate with the colours that are within the set of 36. In fact, I go as far as saying that the set of 24 is enough as well. I might not be able to get an exact colour match, but that's not something that particularly concerns me too much. I think there's far more important things to consider than an exact colour match. And after all, we're creating a piece of art. We're not creating an exact carbon copy of the reference photograph in front of us. So I've got here a little piece of paper, just a strip that I cut from the end of this piece. It's obviously the same colour and the same texture. And I can use this now to test out some of the colours that I think are within this particular study, or colours that can represent those. They don't have to be an exact match. This 5-minute process of selecting your colours and keeping to a limited palette is such an important part of the process. It really does make things simpler and more enjoyable. And the reason for that is that it allows me to then focus on the marks, the values, the lights and darks within this without having to stress which colour am I choosing out of this set of 36. Should I go for this blue now or this blue? Should I go for this brown or this brown, this orange or this orange? When I've got a limited palette, a limited selection of colours, and I really stick to that, it takes that decision making out of the process. So the first colours that I'm going to look at are the oranges, and what I typically do is maybe pick 2 or 3, and then I'll either choose 1, maybe 2, and go with those. So the first one that I'm going to pick up is just the first orange that I can see, and this is a number 186. So let's take a look at that on the grey paper. Okay, and then the next one, let's choose another one. This is a bit more of a reddy orange. This is the 188. In fact, let's label these so I can remember which they are. So that's 186. So this one is the 188. And obviously, if you're using different brands of pastel pencils, these numbers are going to be different. So that's a nice reddy orange. So this colour here, I think would be nice for some of the areas around this part here. The more reddy orange, there's maybe a little bit of red orange down there. Maybe some of the darker areas within the shadow of the body as well. What about a bit more of a yellow colour? So I can see some yellows just around the top here. This is a bit of a yellow colour on as well, just on the beak there. So this yellow here is a 185. So that's kind of a canary yellow, 185. And let's just compare another one to that. So this is a bit more of a lemony type yellow. Okay, so there's 2 yellows there. So let's have a look now at some blues. So turquoisey blue, more of a greeny blue, isn't it? So let's have a look at something similar to that. This is a 156. That's a really nice colour. That's quite a nice colour as well. 155. And then we've got this other one, 153. And quite a bit different from this baby blue. So I'm not going to do this for the entire set of 36, obviously. I'm trying to choose colours that I think are representative of what's in the bird. But it might be that I end up testing very quickly 20 colours out of the 36 and then choosing 10 or 12 from those. So a couple more. I can see some browns in and around here. So we've got browns there. This is a 177. So this is a 179. I quite like the look of that. So any other colours within the reference that are not represented by this combination here? I don't think there are. I think that covers the bulk of it. What I haven't put down, obviously, is the black and the white. They are a given for me. I use those in everything. The black for the darker shadows, and also just to create darker variations of these colours here. And the white, obviously, for the brightest highlights, but also to create some lighter tones from the colours that we've got down. So we've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 colours, plus the black and white, that's 12. But I think we can drop one of these blues here. They're quite similar. So let's drop the 153. This one's just a little bit more vibrant. Now this blue here, at first glance, doesn't look like it's really in any part of the bird at all. But I don't know if you can see just on the wing there, to me is just a bit more of a reddy blue. It's got less green in it, less yellow in it than the blues of the head and the tail. So I think we'll see how it works out, but it might be that we just add a touch of this blue in here. So I'm going to keep that one in. Now what I like to do, and it's just a personal preference thing, is keep the pencils that I've selected in the lid of the tin. Just keep them away from the rest of the pencils. And the reason for that is that it makes it very, very quick and easy for me to select the colour that I need at any point in time. So therefore the interruptions in this process of me making my artwork, I want to try and get into that flow process. The interruption is minimal, next to nothing, because I can go straight to that colour from that limited palette. Now one final thing that I think is worth mentioning is that when you work on a toned piece of paper, whether it's grey or brown or blue or whatever that might be, your colours won't be as vibrant as they are on a white piece of paper. And that's simply because some of the grey muted undertone is just dumbing down these colours and taking some of the brilliance away. The way that you can overcome that is to layer some white down first. So I've got here just a little scrap of paper, last remaining scrap. And if I just show you by placing some of the white down, first of all, and then let's try it with the blue. So this nice turquoisey blue that we've got. I place those over the top. You can see that it just becomes a little bit more luminous. Just helps to shine through a little bit better. We don't want to do that over the entire image, over the entire drawing, but any areas where it seems and feels like there's light coming through, so some of the markings on the top of the head there, and this area of the chest here, then it's going to be a good idea to put some of the whites down first. But you can test this out. You know, if you're not sure, if you're doing a different subject matter, and you think some of these look a little bit flat, then just put some white down. Try not to cover the paper surface entirely. You want some of the tooth to still show through. And then you can just layer your colour on top. This is one I've picked up. This is not a colour from here. This is one of the other colours. That's a pink colour. So the one that I want is, let's put a bit more white down. So this orange colour here, the 188. And it just has a little bit more glow to it. If you can see that, a little bit more glow to it compared to this one here. Okay, so I think we can make a start now. Let's take a look at drawing the outline of the bird. Here we go then, so the drawing out process. This is a relatively simple shape, so as subject matter goes, this is going to be one of the easier ones that you can take on and draw by eye, as opposed to having to trace it or use a grid. But even so, we still want to make sure the proportions are correct and that we get the pose and the gesture correct of the bird. I'd like you to think about this drawing out process in 3 stages. So the first stage is to be very, very loose, very, very general with your shapes. You're not paying any attention to contour lines or curves or any of the detail. This is more about getting a block and a shape that is in the right position compositionally on your paper. For something like this, maybe it's not too important because you've not got any surroundings to have to fit in, but it's just a very good habit to form to get your main subject matter in the place that you want it to be without committing to any detail. So that's stage one. Stage two is to think a little bit more about proportion. So we want to look at the length of the beak compared to the size of the head compared to the wings. Where are the wings positionally in relation to the head and the tail? So we're now getting a little bit more specific, but we're not getting really detailed, really specific, where we're putting in individual lines and curves and details for the edges of the wings and the bottom of the tail and the feet and so on. And then stage number three is where we do refine those more general basic marks that we've put down that are in good proportion, that have got us a solid shape, and we refine those into the more detailed contours. I personally, when I'm working with pastels, I never get too detailed with the drawing stage because a lot of it is going to be lost as you start to block it in. But at this final stage, we can look at the outer edges, maybe some of the detail of the tips of the wings there and around the beak and the feet. So here we go with stage one then, nice and general, just putting in very, very basic shapes to figure out compositionally where we want to place the bird. So I'm going to look at the head shape. I'm going to go bigger than the reference photograph as well. I'm going to go quite a bit bigger. So let's start with the wing shape. So just using the side of the pencil, keeping this very, very loose. All I'm thinking about is the size of the actual thing on the piece of paper, size of the image. So very, very basic shape for the body. Coming down into the tail is going to be somewhere around about there. And then we've got the head and we've got the beak as well. Do a separation between the two wings. There we go. So step back from that. How does that look like in terms of its placement on the paper? Well, I think that's looking quite good. There's a nice amount of equal space below and above the image. Nice amount of breathing space over to the right hand side. If ever I wanted to frame this, it's nicely centered in the middle. Yes, you might argue that you're never going to frame your practice pieces, and so therefore it doesn't matter if it's a bit too high or a bit too low. But it's a really good habit to get into. It, more than anything else, it trains your eye to start thinking about general shapes and general positions before you get into specifics. It trains your eye to start really make your drawing a lot more consistent and your proportions a lot more accurate. So step number two now is to get a little bit more specific, but we're still staying quite general. We're still looking at the bigger shapes and the bigger proportions, and then we can move on to making it a bit more refined. So one of the first things that I like to look at this stage are some of the angles of the gesture. So we've got a nice angle that goes through the beak and through the head there, and then we've got this angle here, and then we've got maybe an angle to the wings as well, but it's these two here that I'm most interested in first and foremost. So I can do a quick check of that one. I think this one that I've got here isn't too bad at all. This one here, I think mine needs to be, certainly this part needs to be more upright. There's too much of a slope to it. So I'm just checking that I've got those okay. Now what I can do is just either, you can just smudge that back just to take a little bit of the edge off it, or use a kneadable eraser. You haven't got to get rid of the marks completely. And now what I can do is start to look at proportions. So still staying general, I want to look at the shape of that head and then how that then goes into the beak. And I'm not looking at the shape in particular, I'm looking more for the length of the beak comparative to this shape here. So if I was to draw an oval over the head, okay, and then if I was to do that oval again, you can see that approximately they're the same size. And it's much easier to judge that than if you try and neatly draw this curve here and then into the beak and then back. You'll end up with a beak that's too short or too long. So I can see that oval there, roughly the same size. And then from here, let's look at this part of the body here, or the neck. So this is actually quite straight, isn't it? See how that's a straight line? So I can just put that in as a block. And I want to look at this point here. Okay, you see how it intersects? If we were to take it up, it intersects the line. So if I was to bring it down here, it's far too close to the beak. We've got the eye is going to be somewhere around about there in our shape. So intersecting the back of the eye, it's going to be somewhere around about there. So I've now got this nice upright feel to this part of the body. I can then go into this part of the body, and this is just going to be an oval more than anything else. So just an elongated oval, and I'm thinking about the angle of this. So if I was to run a straight line through this, am I keeping the angle correct? And then very simple tail piece. is going to come down here, and then we've got what looks like the feet there. So you can see it's getting a bit more specific, but it's still staying very loose, very general. Okay, then for the wings, look at this nice piece of negative space here. So look at that shape there. Look at the size of it as well as the shape of it. So it cuts into the back of the bird. I'm looking at that angle. That's what I'm seeing there. So I've got this nice shape here. Zoom out a little bit. And then we've got the angle to the top of the wing. So that's all I'm focusing on. Now when I get up to this part of the wing, what I look at straight away is, if I was to take a horizontal line across, where's it going to cut into the beak? So it's midway. That then makes it much easier for me to judge the size of this wing comparative to everything else. So you've got a little piece that cuts in there that we can maybe just represent. Okay, and then we've got this nice curve. But if you struggle with your curves, break them into straight edges. So we can look at that as an angle, and there, and there. This can help make things just a little bit easier. So I'm just trying to gauge by eye the size of this comparative to the bird. If you were to take a line up from the tail, you could see that that there splits around about the tail, kind of splits the whole pose in two. So the width from here to the edge of the beak is about the same as the width of the wings. So we do the same thing. So we take a line up somewhere here. That width there is going to be the same. So this wing probably needs to come out a bit further. I could do with moving the iPad across a bit. So I'll take it right up to the edge of the iPad, and then I'll move that across in a second. And then we've got the other wing here. So now I'm just looking at this as a big blocky shape. That's all I'm thinking about, this nice big block of a shape. And then we've got a little bit of negative space here. So look at that sort of shape there. Straight lines. There we go. And as rough and ready as that looks, what it's allowed me to do quite quickly is to create something with reasonably solid proportion. So what I can do now, and it's much easier for me to do now, is to erase these back just to get rid of some of the extraneous marks that are on there that may be a little bit distracting, and just create a more accurate outline around the outer contours. So I'm going to use the kneaded eraser. We'll just take that back a little bit. I'm going to move the paper over slightly so that it's not as close to the iPad, and then we'll come back in and create those more refined contour lines. Alrighty then, so now let's create a more refined contour line. So this is the point where I think a lot of people start and go in straight away with, and it's a surefire way to get your proportions wrong and your overall placement of the composition wrong. So I'm still continuing to observe. I'm looking at little breakpoints in angles and comparing those across to reference points. Look at this one here. So look at that nice little breakpoint in the angle. Just see how that compares if you take it across to the wings there. So it's somewhere around about here, maybe a little bit lower than I had it. These are small refinements that you can make very, very easily in the presence of these marks that you've already put in. Okay, so that will do for me for a line drawing. I've kept it quite rough and ready in places. So this area here, I haven't counted the number of feathers. I've just put down an indication of the angles that they move at. I'm not interested in getting the exact same number, particularly when this area is going to be a little bit softer and more defocused. For the area around the eye, there's no point with a pastel pencil in me getting really detailed and intricate. I've just put in some marks just to represent the different areas of colour. For the actual intricacies and detail around the eye area, the real focal point of this piece, I'll do that as I come onto it with the colours that I use for those particular areas. So with that outline in place, let's get our colours, go back to the ones that we've selected, and we can make a start. So making a start then with the head. And this is always a good place to begin with any animal study that you do, because typically it's going to be your focal point, particularly around the eye area. And as a point of reference, just something to note down, I'm probably going to spend more than half the amount of time that I spend on the entire piece of artwork, the entire drawing, more than half the amount of time I would guess is going to be spent on this area around here, the beak as well. Even though this area accounts for, oh, I don't know, maybe only a fifth, maybe even less than that of the total surface area, I'm going to spend more than half the amount of time. And that tells you something about the level of detail and time that you spend around the focal point comparative to the rest of the drawing. More detailed, more focused around that most important point of interest. And then as you move away from that, you can become looser, quicker, less deliberate in your mark making. Not only does it save a bit of time and speed the process up if that's important to you, but it also can improve the composition as a whole because you've got this combination of more deliberate and precise marks combined with those looser, more energetic marks. So looking at the lightest markings within the head of the bird, we've obviously got this light area here. There's a thin slither under the chin, although I'm sure it's not called a chin on a bird. Anatomy was never my strong point. But then we've also got these lighter markings within the crown as well, within the head of the bird. So it might be that we can get away with putting some blues down first and some of the darker tones and then putting these brighter highlights on top at the end. So almost working darker to light. But you want to test that first. What you don't want to do is spend time and effort putting layers of colour down first, your blues and blacks and maybe some oranges in there, to then put the white highlights on top, only to find that you can't get a bright enough mark because the paper surface isn't picking up the pastel. So first thing I'm going to do, because it's really, really easy, is just put this strong white marking in. And because it's going to be almost pure white, it's almost the lightest mark within the entire composition, entire subject, I can use lots of nice pressure. So I'm just looking at some of the outer edges of the markings, just trying to get a feel for the shape. And as I get to these outer edges, I can just use a few strokes just to break the line a little bit. So rather than using one solid or creating one solid block of colour around these outer edges, let's just create a little bit of sense of feathers, a bit of texture, just by breaking those marks up. Same in this area as it goes into the other colour as well. Okay, and then under the chin area, as I was calling it, we've got this nice light area. Now we've also got some other lighter areas. So there's a little mark in here that I can see, which although it's yellow, it is a bright yellow. It's a nice light yellow. So I'm not going to use as much pressure there because I want to leave some of the tooth of the paper, some of the paper surface texture to show through. That will then pick up the yellow that I put on top. This yellow area, yellowy orange area around here, let's add a little bit of white just into the lightest area of that. Again, not as much pressure as I've used in this area or this area, because I want to hold back for those subsequent layers. And then I'm going to add a little bit on the top of the crown there, just where it's at its lightest. Not much pressure at all. You can see all the paper surface showing through there. So I'm not using a lot of pressure at all there. And then it goes darker in this area, doesn't it? And then lightens up a little bit here, that some of the markings there are quite bright. The light is just catching that top edge. So I'm just going to strengthen that mark, or that line along the top edge there. And then if I can use the point of the pencil, I can just see a really nice little white highlight, or a bright highlight, right on the point of that beak. Now on the beak itself, can you see how, although we know that it's black or a really dark grey, the bottom area here, there's a middle portion here which is almost jet black, it's very, very dark. And this top edge is catching more of the light. So it's anything but black. It's actually a fairly light value. If you defocus your eyes, you can see there's quite a lot of contrast between this part and this part. So what I'm going to do, if I just go in with the black, it's going to be too black, it's going to be too dark. So I'm going to put a layer of the white down first. Okay, so let's move now to the next lightest colour. So I can go to one of the two yellows. I'm going to try and just go straight into this deeper, more canary yellow. I think the lighter of the two yellows that I chose, I think we definitely use that within the body and the wings, but I think for the head it's probably unwarranted. So let's see what we get with this lighter yellow. So definitely some in this area. This is a nice kind of light lemony yellow almost. So all I'm doing is very light pressure. I'm just allowing it to mix with the white that's already there. If we want to make that even lighter, I can go back over the white and adjust that slightly. I'm going to add a little bit just to the bottom of the beak. I can see a little bit of orange in there. So I'll add a bit of orange in as well, but a little bit of this yellow is nice. And then just on the very top edge, although I want it to be quite a light colour, it's not going to be this stark white. Laying the white down first allows me to then create a brighter yellow when I put this on top, but I don't want the final colour to be a white. Definitely some yellow in this area here, and I'm going to take this through into the darker portion there. We'll put some browns in there and some oranges. As it then comes back out to this side, goes into a little bit more yellow, and just around this area as well is a nice yellow colour, nice yellowy orange. Okay, so the next lightest colour, slightly darker than what we've just used, I would say is the orange. So this is the 186. So I can definitely see some orange around here. It's just going into this nice bright yellow. And then we've got this nice orange colour in the bottom of the beak. It's kind of bleeding into the black of the beak there. There's also a hint of that on the top of the beak as well. Only very subtle, only really light pressure here. You don't want to get carried away. And then this bit is really light, so I'm going to leave that and then into the orange around here. So I can use a bit more pressure now because I know that the colour on top of this is going to be the darker brown, maybe even a touch of the black. So that's going to adhere nicely. Okay, and then let's just add a little bit just into this top area here, although I don't want to take it too far. That's going to be for the next section for the body. Okay, now I'm going to go to the brown. So I'm just avoiding the blues for the moment. I'm just trying to stick to the oranges and the browns, and that's just, you know, the way I'm choosing to work. There's no particular reason for that. If you wanted to move on to the blues now, you could do. But what I'm going to do is look for some of the stronger marks, and rather than go in with that black straight away, even if the final colour is going to be almost black, as I just mentioned before, it's nice to have some subtle underlayers just to take the starkness away from the jet black colour. Some artists will say, a lot of artists will say that you shouldn't use black in your work because it's dead and it flattens everything. I disagree with that. I think if you've got colours underneath that are allowed to show through, even very, very subtly, I think that avoids any issues of it looking flat. And, you know, using a black and a white just can speed things up a lot, can make things a lot easier to create those shadow tones, those darker values that you need. I'm just going to touch a little bit of this brown colour in, not too much. This is more just melding and merging the colours beneath it together. Okay, and then the same for this area, so just want to add a nice little bit of colour into here. Probably going to have more of a bluey tinge to it, so I'm not going to add too much into it. So there's a bit of darkness, maybe even a few little yellows and oranges just around this area where the white moves into the next part of the body there. So let's just grab the orange, just bring some of those together. Even a little touch of yellow in there, just on the edges of these white markings. And now I can move on to the black. So I'm going to head straight for the areas or the shapes that are the darkest. Because if you get those in and you put those in nice and strong, it gives you then a point of reference for everything else, how strong or how light it needs to be. So this bottom area of the beak, there's a little shape within there that's as dark as anything else on the entire subject. So I can use lots of nice pressure there. And then we've got this darker shape here. Darker black in and around the separation between the orange and the blue. That's quite a nice dark, strong colour. And in a moment, with a nice sharp pencil, we're going to go in and work on the eye. And then for the top of the beak, I do want to add some black into there. Even though it's a lighter value, I want to get some continuity between the two colours. At the moment, there's too much difference, too much contrast between that, which you can easily see if you defocus your eyes. So very light dusting, nice light pressure. It's very, very light. I can't stress how much I'm just touching the paper surface, letting the pencil kind of hit and miss in areas. Just taking it into that colour, that yellow colour there at the top, just so that it's only the thinnest edge, just very, very subtle on that top edge there. And within this, you'll see little markings, just a few little details, and looks like a little kind of indentation in the bird's beak. So I'm just going to strengthen that. It's an impression of it. You don't have to worry about getting it exact. I'm just going to break this straight line up as well. So this straight line here, there's just areas where it's broken a little bit. Okay, and then back with the white. So using very light pressure again. All this is doing now is just pushing that black, just lightening it slightly, but pushing it more into the surface. And if you want it to be, I think it needs to be a little bit lighter at the front there. And then I think we can, lost that orange a little bit, so I think we can just strengthen that slightly. Alrighty, so I've sharpened my black pencil, and I think now is a good time to do the eye. So I'm just observing, re-observing the shape of the eye, and I'm breaking it into straight lines. So there's these very obvious straight lines that I can see around the outer edge, and I put those in before I put the sort of more spherical shape of the eye in. So we've got these little patterns, these dark patterns as well, that kind of come out with the eye. The bottom of them, I just want to break them into the markings and feathers that are underneath. So again, I'm not just trying to draw this solid shape, which is going to look very planted on top of what's there. We want to try and make it look as though it's within, or the feathers are surrounding the eye, and the eye is embedded within these feathers. And you can do that very easily just by breaking the line up. See, like in that area there, just breaking it up and allowing the feathers to appear as though they're overlapping the bottom of the eye. So once I've got this shape in, I then want to look for where I think the sphere is. And it's a little bit difficult to see on this, although with the reference photograph to hand, whether that's on, you know, something like an iPad or if you print it out, you can see it quite easily. There's a slightly lighter area, slight light highlight here that's got a curved edge to it. That almost splits the eyeball in two. So I'm just going to make a marking for where that is, and then a little bit less pressure for that top part, because it is still, you know, quite a dark value. It's not a bright white highlight by any means. And then I'm going to do a bit less pressure for the entire eyeball, in fact, but I can still see where that highlight area is. And then round the outside of that, it's really dark. So as much pressure, really pressing sharply down on the pencil, just to define the outer edge of that eyeball. And then just with the white, so very, very, probably could do with a sharp point on this, but very, very lightly, I'm just touching that in so that it blends with the black beneath it. And it's lighter on this front edge here, so we can use a bit more pressure there. Okay, and then I want to take this dark colour out, but obviously I want to create some separation between this colour here and the eyeball. The eyeball, or the eye area, is the darkest black, so definitely getting rid of all the paper surface there, if you can. So you can hear hopefully how much pressure I'm putting down. And then you can even use the side of the pencil just to start laying in some tone. There's going to be some blues in there, so leaving a little bit of the paper surface to show through. Alright, so I think it's definitely time to put in some of this really distinctive blue colour of the Kingfisher. So we've got these two areas here that are very similar in the markings, and as I said at the top of this section, two different approaches that we can take. So we can lay down the blues and some of the darker blues and blacks within this area and then add the whites on top of that. And hopefully there'll be enough paper tooth and texture to allow the white to stand out quite sharply. The other option is to put some strong whites in first and then to almost negatively draw around them, so you're reserving those whites. That's a little bit more time consuming though, because you're obviously having to draw around quite small intricate shapes. So for this area, the smaller area, I'm going to go with the one that is a little bit more time consuming. So put the white markings down first and then negatively draw around it with the blue and the black. So I want a nice sharp white pencil for this. So the sharpened white pencil, it gives me two things. It gives me more control, more accuracy over these quite small marks really, but it also allows me to push the pastel into the tooth of the paper, because that sharp point gets right into the pits and the grooves and the dents of the paper, the valleys, and allows me to completely cover the area that the markings appear. So I'm just getting a representation of these. I don't need to get an exact pattern, obviously. There's no need for that. So now go into the blue. So this is the 156. Let's see how that looks. I can use, again, it's got a nice sharp point on it, and I can use fairly strong pressure because I want this colour predominantly to just cover the paper surface. The only colour that I'm really going to put on top of this is the black to blend with it. And I know that that will go on top of anything placed down with any amount of pressure. So I can use quite a lot of pressure here. Okay, and then back to the black. So looking for the darkest areas within the blues, not a lot of pressure. So just touching it in very, very lightly around here. It is quite a bit darker around this area, so I can strengthen that. And if it starts to look a little bit too black and loses too much of the colour, it's no big deal. We just go back over with the blue. Just blend it into the black. And these are looking a little bit too white, aren't they? A little bit like spots more than markings. So I'm just going to lightly dust the blue over the top of them. And it's going to slightly defocus them, but it's going to turn them into a lighter blue rather than a white, which is what they actually are in the reference, and they're not going to look so much like spots then. Alright, so now it's just basically a repeat process for the top of the head, except this time I'm just going to go straight in with the blue and then we'll put those strongest whites on at the end. What I do want to do though is to give myself an indication of these markings. Even though we don't want an exact pattern, you know, we don't need to recreate it exactly as it is there, I do think it is important to get an indication of these almost arrow-like markings on the head and how they move. And if you just put a few in, a few of the key ones, the largest, most prominent ones, it really does help you then move through the rest of them with a bit more confidence. So I can see one really, really clearly that just goes up and above the eye. Can you see that there? It's like it is almost like an arrow shape, like a flattened arrow shape. So I'm just using the black pencil here. Again, not a great deal of pressure, but just putting a very quick and rough indication of where these are. Okay, a lot of that is going to get lost by the time we've finished. So let's start now putting in some of the blue. All right, and then the black. So let's look at the darkest markings, the darkest areas. So I'm trying to keep this a nice squiggly broken line. That's just going to help represent the marking a bit more believably, a bit more accurately than if you were to put it in this nice neat line. So I'm using some lighter pressure around here. There's lots of variations of the blue in there, some darker ones and lighter ones. And if you can just vary the pressure, that's going to give that representation. Okay, so let's see if the whites actually adhere to the paper surface. Let's see how bright we can get. So you've got to have a point to your pencil, definitely, and you need to hold it more upright as opposed to this angle, more upright to get that pastel right into the tooth of the surface. So you're looking for the brightest ones first. Really push it in, you've got to use lots of pressure. And I think that's going to be more than ample, more than good enough. So this is obviously a technique that is a little bit easier and a bit quicker than the one that we used there, not as fussy. So saved you testing it out, you can just go straight to putting your blues down and then add the whites on top. Alright, so I think we're almost done with the head. There's just a few little touches, a few tweaks that I want to make before moving on to the body. So we've got this area here, this orange area, so we need to add a little bit of a shadow into that. So this is the 188, this is a bit more of a reddy orange, so I picked out two and just got a little bit more punch to it than the other one. So trying to add a little bit of texture here as well, just could do with a bit more of a sharp point on it, maybe just a little touch just underneath where it's quite orange. And then with the brown, so this is the 177, it's a bit more of a reddy brown. Just have a look at this shadow area that just runs through the middle. So again, point of the pencil so I can add a little bit of the texture in, a little bit of the feather texture in there. And this is going to blend really nicely with the colours underneath. And then I think we can even just add a little touch of the black just to get the darkest tones in, particularly around this bottom area. It's a little bit darker. There we go. And then with the white, there's just a nice, really thin highlight edge just between this shape and this one. It's only very subtle. A bit more of the point of the pencil to use that. Maybe one here as well, just to help that separation. So all I'm going to do now is just add in a few little white areas, maybe on the wings and on the body below here. Just that underlay, just in the same way that we did with the head. And then we'll come back in and start adding in some of those colours for the body. Okay, so let's move on to the body area. So this is quite a large area in the study that I think we can get in quite quickly. Nowhere near as fiddly and as much detail as we need in the head area, the focal point. I want to start with the lightest colour. So the lightest colour that I can see in there, let's actually go with the 103. So this is the off-white. It's more of a cream colour. And just around the top there on this front edge, I can see this very, very light yellow. And around this area here. And then we've got, this is an off-white colour as well, on this bottom area, maybe a little touch in there. And then the other yellow that I'd picked out was the 185, so this is a bit more of a canary yellow. So I'm just going to lay in a touch, just underneath the orange, just taking it up into the white there. And I'll add a little bit of a layer there into where I'll be adding the orange, and maybe just a dusting underneath the brown as well, just to allow that to show through a little bit. But you can see I'm allowing plenty of the paper surface to show through, so there's lots of tooth for the subsequent layers to adhere to. There we go. And then lighter of the two oranges, so this was the 186. So just trying to work as well, even though I'm working quickly, I'm trying to work in the direction that I can see the feathers going. So I've got this angle here, and then around here it's a bit more curved. And you can see how this area here is actually quite flat. It's not a vibrant orange, you know, not as vibrant as what it is when we put the white down underneath first. But because it's mostly browns around there, I'm not too concerned. This orange as well, the 188, definitely seems to have a bit more punch to it, especially if you dig it into the surface a bit more. So now that I've got those underlayers down, I'm just going to apply more pressure, and I have to apply more pressure for it to actually show up. Just switch between the yellow there, just if I need a little bit of extra lighter colour. So just trying to put a little bit of texture in as well, shorter, sharper marks. got what appears to be the foot there. I think it's the foot anyway, but I can go straight in with this. Quite a lot of pressure because it's quite a similar colour to that, so I don't have to layer anything on top. Let's just tone this area down a bit with the yellow. And then any areas of white now, I don't want them to be white. I want them to be a really pale yellow, so I'm just going to take this canary yellow, the one, where are we, 185. Just going to take that over the top there. So we've still got this nice light highlight edge, but it's not white, it's a yellow colour. Okay, so I've just worked the 2 oranges and the 2 yellows over there just so that I've got rid of most of the paper surface. And then in this area now I can go in with the brown. So we'll try the lighter brown first, which is the 179, just for some of these areas here. So this is not really showing up at all. I mean, very, very subtly it is, but I think we can leave that one, put it to one side and jump straight to the 177. So this is adhering to the paper a lot better because it's a stronger, darker colour. It typically will do that. It'll sit on top of the other colours more nicely. So just looking at the markings, just trying to roughly represent those, but I don't need to get them exact by any means. Some of these strong darks in here, I can just block those in just so I can help get my bearings. I'm going to go over those with a black, and it looks like there's some blues in there as well. But because it's such a dark value, it won't matter that there's a brown in there, even if there's no brown in there in reality. Okay, and let's just add a little bit of a indication of the claw there. And there's a little bit of dark tone just to break up that shape. Okay, so you can see how quickly that's probably taken about 10 minutes or so to fill in that entire area, whereas that's probably taken about half an hour, much longer to do that part. So now if we just put in some of the blue here to get the tail piece in, some dark colour just to separate those two values, I think that will be the body of the bird done, and we can move on to the wings. So the same blue over on top of the white. It's quite a nice vibrant colour this, so I can push the pencil into the paper, get rid of all the paper surface in one go. And again, I don't have to be quite as neat as I do, or quite as fiddly as I do around the focal point of the head. Okay, and then we can go to the black, and let's start again with less pressure. Just get a feel for that. I want a little bit more blue down there because I think that's going to end up being too black. So a bit more blue into the surface of the paper, and then when we go over with the black, it'll look more like a dark version of that blue rather than just the flat black on its own. So I just want to take this across and into the oranges and browns, because that way what I can do is I can lift the pencil off and it gives this gradual sort of faded effect into where the two colours merge and transition. So most pressure there, lift off. More pressure there and then lift off. So I haven't used it yet, but the other blue that I selected, the 153, I think that will help just to create a few of these subtle effects, a bit more subtly than the black will do. And it's just the different feathers that are in there. It's not this one flat, solid blue. And then I can use the white to just create just a few subtle highlight edges. If you think they're too white, then go back over with the blue and just blend it into the pastel that's already on the paper. Alright, so I think we are ready to take the bravery test and have a go with these wings. So very different set of marks to what we've put down already. They need to be really soft and defocused, some lost edges in there, lost edges between the two wings there, so they're quite hard to define, and the outer edges need to be quite blurry as well. So it requires a slightly different approach. The main difference between this kind of rendering and this kind of rendering is the way that you hold the pencil. So we're going to be using the pencil side on. I'm blocking in lots of tone quite quickly, but everything's going to look quite smudgy and quite smoky right until the very end, even more smudgy and smoky than it looks in the reference photograph. So what we want to avoid doing is kind of building colours up in very specific areas. We want to look more at layers. So layering right across the two wings with our lighter colours first, then a slightly darker colour, a darker colour again. And it's only when we start putting in the final layers that things hopefully will become a little bit more defined, in that you can tell the wings, but obviously not too defined that they become sharply, crisply in focus. So starting with the lighter colour first, I'm not actually going to go with white. I'm going to go with this off-white, this 103, and that's just purely because I think the white will be a little bit too stark. I want something that's a little bit warmer in there. And all I'm going to do is look for some of the lighter areas amongst the feathers. So I've got a few reference points with the marks that I put down initially, but it doesn't matter if I don't get them in exactly the right place, because I am giving more an impression of this than a direct representation. So side of the pencil. Now what this might do, because this has got a little bit of yellow in, when I put the blue on top of here, it might actually turn it a little bit green. If that's the case, I might erase those back and go in with the pure white, but we'll see what happens. There's nothing that can't be undone. Pastels are pastel pencils used in this way are quite easy to erase when you're using the side of the pencil like this. Okay, I'm just going to work that in slightly with my finger, ever so slightly. Don't want to push it in too much. Okay, so the next lightest colour I can see within this is an orange, particularly around this area here. So let's just build some of that in and take it through to different parts of this wing just to get a bit of an undertone. But also we've got to get rid of the paper surface as well, so we need to put some layers down. I can't just get rid of the paper surface with the darkest colours, the greys and the blacks, otherwise they'll be too dark. So to get rid of all that paper surface and keep it a sort of a fairly accurate value, not too light and not too dark, we need to get lots of underlayers down, some lighter ones first, so that when we put those darks on, they're not actually going to be particularly dark. And that's another reason for working the pastel into the surface, which is not what you would do when you want a more focused, more defined style. Maybe just a touch just around the outer edges. Helps with continuity, just to pull the colours all the way through. Let's maybe add a little bit more to the areas that are more definitely orange. Okay, so next colour I'm going to go with is this brown. So this is the lighter brown, the 179. I can use more pressure where the darker areas are. This is now where I can maybe start to define some of the patterning. So a little bit darker here because these are obviously darker values. So I know that I'm going to go over with a darker layer on top of that and it will adhere, so there's no danger of me getting rid of too much of the paper surface. So more pressure around here, but then I want less pressure where maybe I'll need to go over with some lights later on, or where it's becoming more like the value that I want it to be ultimately. Any browns in this area? I think we can definitely put some in here. I think we can maybe start to layer some darker colours here for the darker feathers, darker areas of the feathers. So I just want to look at the angles more than anything. Definitely not going to count them. let's go to some of the blues. I'm going to see if I can get away with this blue, which is the one that I've used for the rest of the body and the head. And it is the 156. So let's just put that down and see what it looks like. I've got a feeling it'll probably look a little bit too green. And I think straight away looking at that, I'm not particularly keen on that colour. I think it is going to look green. It's going to mix with the yellow underneath. So I'm going to leave that one for that area. Maybe just put a little touch just around here. Just coming off the head there. A little touch just around the bottom. So for this area, for this blue area, I'm going to go in with this baby blue. And that's a better colour. It's probably a little bit too blue, too vibrant, but we can mute that back with other colours. We can use the white and maybe the yellow as well, just to make it a bit more green. Just gives us a bit more control than that one, which was, I just felt was far too green. Okay, let's just see what this blue looks like on top of this brown. Again, just for continuity purposes, but I want to create more of a grey colour here. So mixing a blue and a brown is always going to muddy the colour and create something that's more neutral. Okay, next colour, and I'm going to go with the darker brown. So this was the 177 that I used quite a bit on the body of the bird. And again, side on. Just looking for those darker areas. So I'm just starting to pay attention a little bit more now to the patterns. Near the abstract patterns I can see. So just seeing that as a triangular shape. So it's really difficult to tell where one wing finishes and the other one starts with this. Which in some ways makes life a bit easier because you can just focus on the shapes that you see and not worry about getting an accurate wing shape. Just focus on the abstract shape that you see. So as I get closer towards what I think will be the final colours, more importantly the final values, so how dark it is, I'm just going to be a bit more careful with the marks that I make. So they're still loose at this stage. I'm still using the side of the pencil, but as I come in these areas here, I don't want to get so loose that I make these really thick lines, because they do go to quite thin lines there. And I need to go darker in this area, but it's getting towards that value that it will be finally. So just taking a little bit more care. And I'm just going to strengthen that blue. And I'm going to put a layer of this down, and then I'm going to put a layer of the other blue, the blue that we used on the head and the body, on top. And I think that will just help it to be in keeping with the colour palette as a whole, because this is quite a different blue. Okay, so just gently going over the top of that. There we go, and it just knocks it back, just takes a little bit of the red out of that. Alright, okay, so I'm now going to go in with some black and white. Now the black I'm going to use really lightly because I know that it's going to adhere really nicely. So still with the side of the pencil. And what this will do is just mute any of the colours that are there that are too vibrant. And if any of the marks you put down are too dark when you use this black, don't worry, because the next layer is going to be some whites, but those whites will be used just to mute the colours rather than create white highlights. So just looking at the strongest areas, let's re-establish this little pattern. Okay, so some colour up here. So let's just do one, blend it in, see how it looks. So I think that's not far off the colour and the value that I'm going to finish with. So just shifting the pencil down in my hand so I've got a little bit more control. So gripping it further towards the nib, and then that allows me just to create more precise marks, more precise shapes rather than marks. And just being a bit more careful as well with the the blending process with your finger, so you don't want to move the pastel too much out of the shape that you've created. So there's a bit of a harder line there. So these lost and found edges, as they're called, hard and soft lines, getting a combination and a mixture of those in within this area is what's going to give it that real sense of movement and authenticity. So while the majority of the marks and edges are lost edges, really defocused, you will get one or two that are a little bit harder and crisper. So this is a bit of a crisper edge here. We've got a bit more of a defined lighter mark, this sort of triangular mark here. So define that a little bit better. So the key is that you're not outlining things. If you put any hard edges down, just soften off away from it. So there's a line there and then soften off, blend in that area. Okay, and just before I put the white in, I just want to make sure that this area here hasn't got any texture in. So I can see quite a bit of paper texture through there. And if you look on the reference, this is where it's at its most smoky, its most blurry. Maybe the same for these as well. You just got to be careful with these that I don't adjust the shape too much. Just want to really work it in. You could use a blending tool for this if you wanted to. Just that will help you get a little bit more of a, well, gives you a bit more control, gives you a bit more accuracy. But for the purposes of this study, I'm going to just stick to my little finger. Okay, and then the white. Now the white we're going to use to obviously add some lighter marks, but also I'm going to use it with really light pressure in some of the areas as a blending tool. So to get rid of some of that paper surface, push more of the pastel into the surface. So we've got this area around here. I'm just going to add some lighter marks. But also what it tends to do as well is just to fill in any remaining gaps. Still using the side of the pencil, really trying hard to avoid, the temptation to hold the pencil that way and put those more definite marks in. So just looking at the areas and the shapes that are lighter, this is where you're almost drawing negatively. So we've got a little shape there. We've got this which extends beyond that wing, so we can just take the light colour out across that one. Just ever so slight touches of white here, just going to be really, really subtle. I don't want it to become too defined. Got some, what looks like a bit of a halo effect around the tips of the wings. So what you can do is just touch a bit of pastel down and then just use your finger just to really knock that back, really defocus it. Okay, we're almost there. I think it needs a few little touches just to help tell the viewer that it's a moving wing. Maybe we can add a few accents, a few movement marks to that. But I just want to tidy up this area, get that complete. This area here where it transitions from the more precise marks to the more defocused marks. So I'm just going to look at some of the colours within there and some of the marks, tidy that up, and then we'll come back in and add some finishing touches and of course the water droplets. So the last thing to put in then are these little water droplets. Now they are really, really simple to do, especially when you're working on a coloured ground. So what I'll do is one or two just to the side, and then I'll do the rest off camera. There's a lot of repetition there, but we'll talk about some of the differences between having some really in focus ones, really kind of detailed ones or more detailed ones, and then some softly focused ones, because that gives a sense of depth. The water droplets that are closer to us, closer to the camera, they're going to be crisply defined, but then you're going to get some that are further away that are more softly focused with those lost edges. The beauty about these water droplets is if we can get some that are over the wing and we can put them in sharp focus so they're well defined, what that's going to do is tell the viewer even more so that these wings are fluttering really quickly because the camera is still in focus. There's something there that is in focus, but these are just moving so quickly that they're blurred. So I think that'll be a nice little extra touch if we can get that in. We might have to erase a little bit of area so we can get it in nice and crisply, particularly on this paper. But let's do one here to the side just so we can see the technique. So what I'm going to do is just pick out one of the water droplets. Let's take this one here, for example. And just to show you how easy it is, all I'm going to do is put in the light highlight area. So you can see this area here. That's probably a little bit too big, so I'm zooming in. I'm forgetting that I'm zooming in. So let's just make it a little bit smaller than that. So just a touch for the highlight area. There we go, there's a bit more realistic size. And then let's take the black. You could pick up a dark grey if you wanted to. You want to have a reasonably sharp point as well. So I've got a nice sharp point on the white, but I haven't sharpened the black, so just got to be a bit more careful. So all I'm doing is just laying down a subtle, tiny subtle area of shadow tone. So lightly touching it, I don't want it to be too heavy. I can just push that into the surface with the white pencil, just dancing it over the top. And then there's some lighter areas, but they're not as light as this highlight area that I can just touch in. Another little shadow. There we go. And then what I'm going to do is take one of the colours, maybe the blue, because what we want to do is just lay down a bit of tone that is different to the paper surface. Really, really light pressure, hardly touching the paper surface at all there. And there's just a little bit of a lighter, just a top edge lighter corner. It's all quite subtle, but you don't have to get it exact by any means. Let's just strengthen this one. Strengthen that shadow there. Okay, and that's all there is to it. And in and of itself, it probably doesn't look much. It might not even look too much like a water droplet, but I promise as we get more in and build them up, it's going to look really, really believable. So there's the first one in. The key to making this work is to vary the size. The shape as well, but only from maybe a circle to an oval. So you can see that one's more circular, that one's a little bit more oval. But making them lots of different sizes, that's going to be quite key. And we've got to keep the pattern random as well. So we're not just going to have one dotted here and one here and one here and one here, because that might feel random, but in reality, what random means is that you're going to get 2 or 3 close to each other, and then you're going to get some that are spaced apart. The best way to approach this is to just pick areas, little areas within your reference, and then repeat them in your drawing. We don't want the exact same pattern. That's going to take far too long. That's overkill, but it is good to observe little areas and little patterns within the whole image that you can then repeat in places on your painting. So I like, for example, this little cluster here. And just as we've got a variation in size and shape, we've also got a variation in the focus. So some of them, like this one here, is quite sharply focused, and this one, but then you've got some marks which are just very blurry and defocused. So using the side of your pencil, you can just put in almost like a little splodge, just knock that back with your finger, and you want to then dot those around in different areas as well. You can see I've added quite a few more water droplets there. Actually, it didn't take me as long as I thought it would do, only about 10 minutes, and that's because a lot of them are just these defocus marks, a little bit of pastel down, using the little finger then to just blend it into the background. I did actually use this 103, so the off-white as well as the white, just to help vary the colours a little bit as well. And the ones that were in a bit more focus, once you've done 1 or 2, you literally don't even have to look at the reference photograph. You get a feel for it, you can start to create your own. So this has been a pleasure to do this one. It's a really, really interesting subject, some really strong, stunning colours in there. Pastel pencils still got to be my favourite medium. So versatile, they allow you to create that variation of mark, the soft, smoky feel, along with the crisp edges. And you know, if you can get comfortable using pastel pencils, there is no subject matter that they can't take on, they can't tackle. So as ever, I hope you have a go at this particular lesson, whether it's this reference or another Kingfisher reference that you find of your own. And we'll add some different references within the course materials if you want to do a slightly different composition. And you know, if you can do this particular bird, this particular pose and gesture with the flapping wings, then really no bird study is beyond you. This is going to be as difficult as anything that you come across, but not necessarily difficult when you use pastel pencils with these techniques. So thank you for watching, thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you very soon in the next pastel pencils lesson. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed that lesson. Please do let me know in the comments below whether you've had a go with this or whether you plan to have a go with this and how you found it. Was it easy? Was it difficult? Anything that you found particularly challenging? It's always great to get your feedback. If you would like to join me on my premium drawing course, you'll find that over at drawawesome.com. It's where we take you through a program of weekly drawing projects, kind of build you from whatever level you're at right now, even if that's a beginner, all the way through. The aim is to get you all the way through to a really accomplished, awesome artist. And we do that through regular weekly drawing projects. So if you're interested in that, head over to www.drawawesome.com and also maybe consider checking out artcooler.com as well. So Artcooler is our free community for leisure and hobby artists of any ability, doesn't matter what standard you're at, even if you're a professional, you're welcome there as well. And it's just a place where you can share your artwork with other people on the same journey as you. You get to see their artwork. It's kind of helps to inspire you, give you some creative ideas. We've got monthly challenges there as well, and lots of free drawing lessons on there as well. There's a nice little app, again completely free, that you can use on your iPhone, your iPad, or your Android phone or tablet, and it just makes it very, very simple to interact with the community and kind of just surround yourself with like-minded people. So when you get a chance, go and have a look into that. That's artcooler.com. Okay, so thanks again for joining me on this lesson. Hit the subscribe button on the channel if you haven't already, and you're going to get notified as soon as I upload a new art lesson. Hopefully it won't be too long. But until then, until next time, take care and enjoy your art.